Welcome to the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. We're in episode 59, and I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm here with Tim.
Hey, everybody, it's Timothy Peterson. I am so glad to be here for episode 59. I can't believe that we are that far along. It's been so much fun, and it's also very rare. As you'll see, we don't have a guest today. We're going to be talking, with ourselves and to all of our wonderful listeners. So, special treat for you guys. Let's look at it that way, right? So I have our two sponsor mentions to put out there for everyone. So the first one is Punch Out to Go. They are a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. Punch Out to Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. With their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for Punch-Out catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents to accelerate your business results, thanks to Punch-Out to Go. And to our second sponsor, we have Balance. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com, book a session, and tell them what your needs are. And they are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor Balance and to Punch Out to Go. And Isaiah, back to you for introducing ourselves.
Yeah, I guess we'll introduce ourselves again. Maybe for people that don't necessarily know us that well, I'm the CEO of Trellis, a digital agency that does a combination of B2C and B2B e-commerce, and B2B has become more and more interesting to us because it's not as well known in the market, and that's kind of how we got together and started this podcast. So yeah, why don't we introduce ourselves, Tim? Because maybe we don't normally do that. Maybe, this could be someone's first time listening. Who knows?
That's a really good point. Is there anything else you wanted to say about Trellis?
It's been a crazy. We're almost coming up on 10 years, so it'll be the 10-year anniversary in April next year, which is like 5 months away, and then we're coming to like almost 100 people, which is pretty crazy. We're not there yet, but like we'll be there soon. And we used to be a small agency, but I guess now you could call us more of a mid-size agency at this point, right?
That's incredible. I mean, I'm going to give an early congratulations to you and the entire team at Trellis. I mean, 10 years is incredible. Having almost 100 people is incredible. And, I'm looking forward to the 20th and 30th anniversary party to see where we are then, right? I mean, so that's pretty great. So for our listeners' benefit, I mean, Isaiah and I met and talked about starting this podcast. I mean, as he said, because B2C there's so much more content out in the world. There's so many podcasts taking different angles in that space, but very little, even to this point, a year plus later after we launched this, that are about B2B e-commerce specifically. We saw this need and we wanted to dive in and have some fun and get, expert opinions and chat about this a lot. My background, just so people know, is I was a retail exec at one point at Macy's and Bloomingdale's and a variety of places. I worked for a time in data, even with catalogers and helping them launch their first website. That was in the first .com boom back in 2000. And since then, I'm coming up on my 23rd anniversary in e-commerce overall, which is amazing to me. I started in January of 1999. I think was the first actual e-commerce startup that I participated in. So been a long ride, and I've had many great roles since then. And now mostly I'm doing fractional C-suite work and working with even our friends at Trellis on some things. So great to talk to the listeners again about a whole variety of hot topics here. How do you want to kick this off, Jose? What did we decide we were going to title this episode? What were we thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think the title is going to be, the time is now, right? To digital transformation, to become a digital first e-commerce organization as a B2B organization. I think the time is now. I mean, honestly, it's even for us that's in the industry, we're the ones pitching and selling this kind of stuff. It's the last few guests have really made me realize that there really isn't much time left for people to adapt. And I kind of agree with some of the folks. I think it was our last guest or maybe two guests ago, where it's like, if you're not already certain part into the journey, you might have to look at alternatives like shelf aware or find like another kind of angle, or frankly just sell your business, because the time it takes to make this transition. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, it's a multi-year, it's probably like a 3-year transition. Let's say you're like, especially for companies that maybe have practically zero e-commerce. Let's say your e-commerce is a very small part of their business, right? To make it, 10, 20, 30, 45% of your business, it's a 3-4 year transition. And that in 3-4 years, we're talking 2025, that at that point, the other people that are further ahead, they have such a leg up because they're not starting from scratch, or they're not starting from a very small level. They have a platform. They're already maybe deeply invested in Magento or BigCommerce or whatever the other platforms, SAP Hybris or Headless, and then they can build on top of that. So in 3 years, they're going to be way further ahead than these other people that are just like trying to get something running right now. So I think really it's like the time is now. If you wait any longer, it just might be too late. It's crazy to say that, but I think that's where we're getting to.
Well, I don't think it's crazy to say it anymore. I mean, I'm going to just dive right in there with you on this. I mean, I think maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, before we had our pandemic, I might have had a different view on this, that, you had time, there was a window, because I like talking about the pace of change and how it's accelerated, and all that's true. I mean, we've all seen it. However, there is something a little bit different now, and I think there are a lot of factors at play. I think, first of all, you do have to consider the digital world as a given, and you have to consider digital enablement for order placement and payment and e-commerce itself and all of these different things as a given now. They've got to just be a given. It can't just be, oh, we will expect a fax, we will expect a call, we will expect actually something coming in the mail, we will expect an in-person, contact with somebody for a sale to take place. I don't think you can expect that anymore. I think those things are going to become increasingly the exception as opposed to the rule. If somebody wants to do something in person or over the phone, whatever, there's nothing terrible about that. However, it still means that there's got to be a core that's digital, or if somebody comes in person, maybe they're doing something digitally. For example, I'll give you a quick example that just came up this week. I was talking to somebody who's doing a product release, and it's kind of confidential, so I won't tell all of our listeners all the details yet, but they're doing a product release. And what they're doing is they decided that they wanted to do a combined in-person launch of this particular product, and they wanted to do a live stream of the in-person launch. And so there are going to be people doing e-commerce, being directed to a site. There are going to be people talking live in the way that we're talking live while we're recording this, saying, look at this, and showing the product. And then there'll be people physically there with the product who are directing people to place orders on, I guess they're Square readers, Square, the company, readers. So they're tapping in whatever information and paying whatever they need to get the launch of this new product. But see, I think that gives a great example of how things are working really in B2B today, because this is a B2B scenario. It's like, there's no reason you can't do something in person. There's no reason you can't. enable it or connect it to other things. But the core is digital now. The core, the e-commerce is the core.
Yeah, and I think a good way to think about this is there's a guy on social media that I follow. His name's Chris Walker. I don't know if you've seen him. He's more in the B2B side.
Sure, I know Chris Walker. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a very simple point that he typically makes, and I think it applies especially to B2B. You know, he's more talking about SaaS companies, but I think it also applies to these B2B distribution and manufacturing and these hard good companies that he's not necessarily working with, which is that now in today's world, we have the ability to reach a lot of people for a lot less money, right? Whether it's social media ads, whether it's a podcast, right? Like this, 1 hour of time, we ship it off, it gets edited. It's not that much of our time to get this out in the world. Can reach hundreds or thousands of people, right? We're actually coming up on hopefully 10,000 listeners soon. So all of a sudden it's like, how much time it would take for me to call 10,000 B2B customers and talk to them? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Compared to the time that I've spent on this podcast, like it would be almost impossible, right? Like, and this doesn't even include like our blog posts and the things that we've created based off of this, right? And we're going to get a lot better at marketing this next year, as we talked about, Tim, too. So my point is, like, digital enables you to hit so many more people at scale for a lot less money if you do it correctly and you do it in a smart way. And I think the companies that don't take advantage of that, they're just going to be, it's going to increasingly become impossible to compete. I mean, a very simple example, I don't know if you saw, I saw this on the news somewhere where like the Ford CEO was like, yeah, like he just blatantly is openly admitting that like the direct model of Tesla is just so effective and they have to, it's hurting them because Tesla can just focus on great products. They don't have to have this complicated middleman. You can just go to their website. Everyone knows who Tesla is. They're well regarded brand. They do a good job with, digital marketing, and they don't even spend that much on it because it's so effective to hit so many people. Like Elon Musk just tweets and you get, 50 million views. And, the model of Ford of how it's like, it goes to the distributor and then people negotiate prices. Like there's so much lost in that process of value to Ford to be able to reinvest in the products. That's a huge problem for them, right? So this ability to go direct to the consumer or direct to the business and B2B if you're a distributor and not have them call you up and be more efficient. I think it's like that whole process is like basically like, I don't even know how to describe it exactly. It's like I guess you have to do it, right? The time is now. I don't see how you could not do it soon, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, and I'll keep coming back to this with you because I'm a believer. I mean, the time is now. I mean, and there's that's from an old quote. James Baldwin, the author, said the time is always now, and I love that quote. And
who said that? Sorry, who said that?
James Baldwin, the author James Baldwin.
Okay.
The time is always now, and he had said this, I think, in the context of, like racial justice. I mean, it was a whole different thing. The time is always now. Like, why are we waiting? What's going on here? But the line is so important all the time, and it just has new resonance, I think, given how businesses have evolved and how things have advanced. And Tesla's a great example, and a lot of these examples that we bring in that are sometimes B2C, there really is a lot of connections still, and a lot of things we can learn from each other. And I know that we've talked about this from 58 other episodes, but there are still things that are expectations that a consumer has in the B2C world that they carry over as an expectation as a business representative or a business owner in the B2B world. I always talk about using my phone and wanting to just handle a transaction through a click on my phone or what have you. And if I can't do that for B2B, that sometimes bothers me. I know that there are hurdles and there are other things that have to be considered, but why can't I just tap and go for a lot of B2B transactions, and more that is the case, especially for things like SaaS. Software as a service. Why not? I mean, I don't understand why I couldn't do almost everything completely digitally, and make it seamless, and maybe have a backup, area for customer service or sales with humans that I can interact with live if I need to. But, the time's now, because everyone who hasn't done these things is going to continue to get the business because it's easy. There's less friction. It's easier to just get larger audiences, as you said. And, I'll bring up one last thing before I, throw this back to you too. But what about, people always talk about internationalization and such. Well, there's nothing better than the neutrality of a platform where, maybe you have ability to switch languages or what have you in the platform, but you can access it from anywhere. It's not like the complications of catalogs and phones and whatever else existed before.
I mean, cross-border is here. Like, the barrier, I mean, you have companies like Zonos, that's a partner of ours. They're a cross-border app that you can add on to your e-commerce platform. Obviously, Shopify, Magento, BigCommerce. BigCommerce just launched multi-store. I don't know if you saw that. It's allows you to create multi websites within one platform. All of these big platforms are making it easier to translate, go international, go multi-store, because their customers are demanding it, right? Like, if you're in the US, then it's like, well, why wouldn't you just start selling in Canada, right? Like, especially Canada or Mexico, it's not too hard. Those are easier logistical hurdles because, it's a little bit of a, cross-border, but it's still the same continent, right? So it's not, you don't have to like fly across the ocean to ship the product out. So yeah, I mean, all this stuff is coming. Let's talk a little bit about like what's interesting to me, and I think what we're seeing, and we're having more and more conversations with B2B companies that are all over the map. And what I find is that the ones where the executives are starting to realize and get it are just so much more successful. And I want to bring up an important point. I've seen two different types of this. I think the executives have to be involved, like CEO, CFO. It was interesting. The CFO joined one of our kickoff calls yesterday, which is a little bit, strange to me, because usually the CFO is like kind of more behind the scenes doing finances, but he was like very involved in like the process of us, figuring out how to build up their new site. But it was good. Like he understood the business. He could answer questions. We were involved in design and marketing. I mean, he might be one of the owners. I don't really know, like, his title I know is CFO, but I don't know a lot about, he might be an owner, right? Anyways, but the point is, these executives are starting to get more involved. I think they have to be more involved. I don't think you can just like be like, hey, go figure it out. Like, that doesn't work, right? You need executive buy-in, or the executives need to work really closely with the people doing the work, whether it's, director of e-commerce. So I think there's building a team under the executives. And then there's, what I found too is I've seen some executive involvement, but I've also seen it backfire, because the executives sometimes or the leadership, they're so not experienced with this stuff. Like, it's so far away from their core expertise that they just start demanding things and creating problems because their expectations are just so far from reality that can become problematic. And I've seen that also. So like, I guess what I'm saying is it's great to have executive involvement, but I've also seen it backfire, where the executives come in and think that just by demanding things and, using their executive power, it's going to somehow magically speed up the process, when you still need to go through the pain of this, basically rechanging your entire company. Using very bad words here about how to describe this, but digital transformation.
I'm going to use rechange. I'm going to use
rechange your organization.
I love it. But you're absolutely. I think our listeners are really going to love this, because part of what you're talking about, and part of what I really believe too, is that it's not just that the time has come. The time is now, and things have got to change. it's that, there are people like a CFO, who you mentioned here, deserves a lot of credit because they realize how maybe the financial health of that company is going to be tied to making these changes and doing these things.
Yeah.
Because this is, it's not just like, oh, let's invest in a fantasy or something new. That's not it anymore. I mean, it's absolutely so much not the case anymore. These are essentials. That's why I like using that word core. It's like, what are the core things that allow your business to function and to thrive, and all this sort of stuff. And you can't say it's the fax machine over in the corner, right? You can't make these kinds of comments anymore and be believed. Like, there's no way that you could be a C-level leader and say, this is how everything I need technologically in order to make my business run. Well, you better have a good e-commerce site, right? Because if you don't have part of that core. Like, there's something that's missing.
Well,
that's critical to success.
it was great to be on this with the CFO because we were able to talk about the value of product data and how it's not just, you can go buy product data, right? There's a lot of these companies that you can just buy it from, but then that doesn't necessarily mean what you bought is right for your business or well thought out and going to be structured in a way that's good for e-commerce, because there's all this marketing and kind of SEO and thought that needs to go in how you present the data and how you organize the data. And you might have, especially if you're a distributor, you might have a bunch of different data sets from different manufacturers, and you got to normalize it into one data set. And I was trying to explain to them how there's a lot of skill that goes into doing that well, and why we have going back to our partner Situation. You remember the Situation guys? I think I might not have been.
Oh, sure, I do.
CEO. We should get him back on, by the way, because I feel like they probably.
That's a great idea. I
bet he has a lot more to tell us, because they're so they've grown a lot. But what they do is a lot more hands-on, right? They really help you figure out your product data, and they don't just give it to you, right? There's consulting, and it's a much larger engagement. But I think when companies get their quote and then they compare it to the guys that just sell you data, it's of course it's more expensive because they're putting in the time and the effort into making it. And what I was trying to explain to the CFO is but you're probably going to end up saving time and money, because what they're going to give you is ready to be used. Whereas we get data from one of these other sources, we're going to have to massage it. They're going to have to massage it. Us and the customer are going to have to work on it. We're going to have to bill them for that time. All the time that goes into taking this data adds up. So one way or the another, you're paying for it. So it might be better to just pay for it with someone that really specializes in that process and does it right, not just, you see what I'm saying? And by having those executive conversations, it's a lot easier to get them to realize the value versus a lot of times when executives, a lot of times I see the problem in B2B is they're not on these conversations. So they go make a guy do the conversations, and the guy doesn't know how to sell it because the guy is just, mid-level, not that experienced, and or woman, I should really, sorry, woman or man is coming back to the executives, and he's just giving them prices, right? And then the executives just see these two different proposals, and they don't really understand that, the one that's twice the money isn't necessarily twice the money, because it's actually going to do what you need, whereas the other one's going to only get half the job done, and you're going to spend more money getting the rest done, right, yourself or.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned, over the years, and I've seen a lot recently too, is that, the conversation has shifted in a lot of ways. I mean, people do talk about technology a lot in a way that they didn't used to. I mean, so that's a positive, right? And they are talking about, I think much more now than they used to, about the speed of things and having to look at what the competition is doing and think more quickly and act more quickly. But I think the part that hasn't changed as much ties in again with some of the things that you're saying here. And that's that, let's say if somebody raises their hand in a company and says, we must do a better job at B2B e-commerce, people say, well, that's a marketing expense and that's a sales expense. And, they put it in a certain bucket, and the bucket doesn't necessarily serve the truth, or it's not serving the entire business, because it's not really like a sales expense, to look at e-commerce anymore. And that's why it's great to have CFO buy-in, because they can understand exactly what it means to the business, and that, it's a different kind of expense and a different kind of investment in the future of your business. And the other thing I'd say to that too is that I've had really successful conversations in B2B lately where, let's say it's a manufacturer. I visited multiple manufacturers in the last few years, and one of them was a health and wellness manufacturer, right? A lot of products that go out wholesale, they're in supermarkets and drugstores all over the world. Now, but here's what was interesting in the conversation. They talked to me, they gave this pitch to me about how they spend so much money on product development, on the science of the product, on their analytical tools about the product. And they're like, well, what do you spend on getting the product out there and dealing with your customers, everybody that you wholesale to? And they're like, oh, well, we don't really spend as much. It's not a thing. And I'm like, you're a bunch of baloney bags. It's like, I really was having fun with this conversation because I was like, I enjoy all of you in this conversation, but you're not hearing yourselves. You're proud of your investments in the latest fill in the blank in these areas, but you're not even mentioning investments in the latest in this area, primarily e-commerce or what have you. And that is a conversation I'm very happy to have, and I have to have now a lot, right? It's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's like, so who knows about all your cool, fancy new things that you developed? And is the consumer aware? Can they even tell that it's necessarily better because maybe it's a more expensive product? Why, are they going to be able to make that decision when they go to the store, when they call you up? And because most of these product value nowadays is digital, right? Like when I look at a more expensive product, usually the perception comes from social media, a nice website, a nice product page, images, all these digital assets, digital branding, all these, this digital sophistication that shows this like kind of more like Tesla. Like you go to Tesla's website, and I guarantee you, if you look at Tesla's website and their product pages and you compare it to some of the other, manufacturing websites, it's probably better than a lot of them, right? So
it is. It is. It's also more detailed. It's not just. It's interesting. Tesla's a great example of a lot of things, and people don't all have to love Tesla to use them as an example, right? I mean, you don't have to say, I'm the biggest fan, I'm going to buy their car. However, they're a great example, for the disintermediation you were talking about before, like going direct to people. But also what you said, like there was I really wish I could remember the quote because it was on LinkedIn, I think a while ago, but somebody was talking about Tesla's approach to content. And it's like, it's the only content that I want to have as my girlfriend, right? Or something. And I thought it was hilarious the way they were talking about, because it's really something they fell in love with, right? Yeah. It's like they love everything about it. There's so much passion there. There's so much detail. I know everything about Tesla from, being involved in their world. It's such a community, that kind of thing. Where do you get that passion for a lot of other, B2B manufacturers, distributors, whatever, or that level of understanding? Right? Yeah. They don't understand, or they don't know where to find information on.
Yeah. Building that community effect is a whole nother angle. And then there's the data. I mean, remember a guest a few weeks ago, was talking about how just even having a good e-commerce experience, you can sell the data back to the manufacturers, right? So there's just all these different things that you can do with these digital experiences at scale that you just can't do in person. And it doesn't mean that in person is bad, or like you said, I think direct mail catalogs can still be super effective, but it's like more effective if it brings you online, or it's a everything is more now multifaceted, going back to digital first, right? It's like that digital first organization with, you can still send, Google for years, and I think they still do it, they send out, Google ad promos. So like if you're a new Google Ads customer, they send like $100 off or $1,000 off your first 10,000. That's all in the mail. That's a physical mail. But the only way to use it is to go on Google and go plug it into the, their system, and you have to be a new customer usually is how they do it. and they still call you. They have people. Like, it's not like they don't have people, right?
Sure.
That, you know, they're always trying to get you to spend more. But yeah, I mean, let's go back to the culture, because I want to talk a little bit more like in detail about like what do you think the companies need to do to really do this right? Like, I guess what I would see is like, you need to get this executive alignment. And I think, like you said, it's cross department. You need to basically come to Jesus, come to terms with the fact that like this isn't like marketing or sales. It's just like, this is a giant company wide expense. Like, I think that's the only way to think about it. It's product data, it's operations, it's ERP, it's logistics, it's sales, it's marketing. You know, it's literally, it's finances, the accounting, it ties back to the accounting. It's literally the entire company. And that may end up being a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year expense between all the people internally, the third parties, the software. The only way to justify it is a company expense, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and you're right. This is so critical. This is probably worthy of more episodes with guests than without. This piece is critical. It's like, what about the culture and the change, and what do you need to do? I mean, I'm going to throw a couple things out there, and maybe it'll drive some controversy. Who knows, right? But one of the things is that I think that companies have to have a brand. They have to have a story, right? If you don't have a story that you can talk about internally, then you can't really put it out into the external, world for your, B2C or B2B business. You have to have something, right? And I think that is a step that a lot of companies didn't really even take because they didn't have to. They were the only supplier of widget X or, service, Z or something.
They didn't need a big brand book. They didn't need this fancy brand book, to present themselves, right? Like, they're not Sephora or these like brand company. They're not brand first companies. They traditionally, but now.
Exactly. So, yeah. Oh, no, you go ahead. And
I totally agree with you. I think that's a good starting point. That's why I'm saying this whole investment, it starts a little bit with brand. Who are you? What's your story? What digital assets do you have? What images do you have? What content do you have? I mean, a lot of these logos that we've been working with, like, I've been getting more aggressive, being like, well, we need to fix your logo before we can do the website. Like, I don't want to redo their website, and it's a big project, and then our work looks like crap because the logo was built like 20 years ago, and you can tell, right? Like, it just.
Oh, I mean, I'm gonna do like what my grandmother used to do. I'm gonna look over my eyeglasses like this, because it really is that kind of. It's like, what am I looking at, right? I mean, and this is the part two of what I was gonna say. The part two is that, so fine, you have that conversation internally about brand, so you can go external, and but the part two to that is, well, really, what is happening in this story, and what kind of clarity is there, and which channels are you going down to get that story out into the world? And so it's the classic model of the content fairy tale. It's like, there's a once upon a time where you set the stage. There's the villain and the hero, and you're the hero, right? There's a conflict. Oh my God, we have to do something. The market is missing product X or service Z, right? And then there is the special moment, the grand finale, the happily ever after, where you're a customer of us and your problems are solved, right? So it's classic, right? Those are things that Tim didn't make up. I mean, these are classic shortcuts to get to a point, right? But what happens is that a lot of B2B concerns, they may even get to that point, and then they're like, well, we don't communicate in social media. Like, B2B doesn't do that, right? Or we don't do YouTube videos because that's not what we've done traditionally. That is a huge stumbling block today, because I go out into YouTube or other places, I'm looking at videos all the time for legitimate business reasons to try and find like an explanation of something, or, somebody doing an animation of a deck or whatever, right? And if you're not out there, I'm going to move on to the next person because I don't have time, right? I'm trying to get something done as like a fractional COO of this business or whatever. So they have to think like that.
What they don't realize,
I go into the room and say it.
Yeah, what a lot of these B2B companies don't realize too is a lot of them get caught up on one thing. Like, we need to rank number one for SEO. It's like, well, how do you think SEO works? It's a very complicated process, right? And a lot of it is driven by social media and backlinking and PR. And it's like, you're not going to have any of that if your content sucks. You don't have any videos. You don't have a decent online brand, and you don't have, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many factors that go into it. So yeah, I think it's a multifaceted thing. And just touching on that a little bit, like, the companies that I think are doing well when moving forward with B2B e-commerce, they're realizing they need to fill some gaps internally. I don't think it's enough to just have one. A lot of times I see companies that just throw one guy at it, right? The e-commerce manager, person. I don't think that's enough anymore. I think you need to have the executive team, the buy-in. I think you need at least 3 or 4 people internally, like, could be an e-commerce manager, but then they're going to need help from like the ERP guy, right? Like, they're going to need some sort of IT, back office person, because the ERP side, almost, generally there's some sort of ERP integration, operations related work that's complicated, right? So you have that work. Then you have marketing work, that can be difficult, and you have sales. So I think you need at least 2 or 3 people. I mean, we saw one where they had an internal graphic designer, which was helping them with the brand and the design. And then you can go out and more effectively bring in a company like us, like a Trellis or whatever. It doesn't have to be Trellis. But I think when you try and put
it has to be Trellis. It has to be. That's what I tell everyone. It has to be Trellis.
I think when you try and put it all on one person, though, like, that's where it just doesn't really work, because that one person's trying to do operations and, make the ERP work with e-commerce and the e-commerce platform and make them talk together and figure out all the product data. Like, they're trying to do too many things. And a lot of times their skill set is maybe more marketing. Like, e-commerce is so broad. It's like, well, what are you really good at, right? Like, maybe you're really good at marketing, or maybe you're really good at product data. Like, it's not likely that the person you hire is going to be able to, like, be this genius, facilitator of all these different skill sets and bring them all in house. So I think that's a big failure, is they need to bring more resources to the table, on top of also bringing in probably a third party, most likely.
Well, you're right, and I think that leads to a whole other piece of this. Again, just putting these thoughts in the minds of our listeners. But another piece of this is that and maybe people don't say this directly, but they're also thinking, like, what do I get out of this, right? Like, I've gotten in situations with B2B concerns where they're saying, well, I can understand that it's like 25% of our sales, and maybe it'll be 30% of our sales, but we have these vast sales teams that need to be kept, happy, and they've got all this business that's, coursing through them. And then we've got our product development team that does whatever. And I'm like, no. Just step back a second. Like, talk to those salespeople and talk to them about what would speed things up for them. It goes back to what you're saying. It's like, well, getting more qualified leads into their hands more quickly, taking all of the low-hanging fruit kinds of sales that they don't need to be bothered with, and, getting those just done, funneled right into a great e-commerce experience. And then also bumping people up. If it's an enormously complicated multi-million-dollar order, then something could happen on the web that brings up, that here's Isaiah, our top sales guy, to talk to complete this sale. So people are not, like, putting all of it together. They'll still set up those hurdles and say, well, our sales team. And the last thing I'll say is the product piece, is where people on the product side don't realize how valuable it is for research on their customers and their potential customers to know what they want, and you can get that data so quickly and easily through your site that would be much harder to get otherwise. Get it in a week, get it in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it was a few guests ago that was saying, like, people are measuring the wrong things. They're like, oh, we only get one e-commerce sale, and then it was I forget what it was. It was the company that was thinking about it more holistically, and they put everything online, and their sales are way up, but it was still a lot offline or in store, or whatever they were getting calls. But it's like, because people were researching them, finding them online, finding the data, and then calling them up, or the digital first touch point was increasing all their other sales. And it's
Yeah.
hard to perfectly measure that. And I think that's also part of the problem, is that B2B companies aren't thinking about this stuff, because and it's hard for them to say, well, we're going to invest, $500,000 into e-commerce, but it's only, most of the value is going to be increasing our, in-store sale, or, our in-store pickup, or our call-ins, right? Like, it's hard for them to kind of wrap their head around that kind of investment when it's not direct. Like, the ROI might not be 100% online, right? Or e-commerce sales, right? But the ROI is still probably there if you do it correctly, and it drives just way more brand awareness, brand loyalty to the business, right? It is a hard thing. I mean, that's why I think just in general, marketing is hard to measure. And I think that people are too focused on perfectly measuring marketing versus just common sense of, like, how do people want to buy and shop, and how do I do a better job? Right. And invest right? Like,
and that's, I'm so glad you said that, because that's actually, I think we have takeaways from every single episode. The ones that I've gone back and listened to, or that I hear about from friends, we have takeaways. They're really things that people can just say, like a nugget. They could say, okay, that's good. That's a great takeaway, right? Think about how you approach things, and it's, you have to have something, pick something, right, to achieve. But it's not going to be necessarily that every single thing is measurable to 100%. That's not the way that this works. You're bringing more people in. You're bringing being able to move more quickly. You're assisting your salespeople. You're assisting your product teams. You're all of these things. You're assisting accounting. From the way that billing and invoicing, whatever could happen through your e-commerce site. I mean, all these things are great positives. So just don't worry so much about having everything as 100% measurable and make it an excuse not to move forward. It's better to just move forward, right?
Well,
it's better.
I think this is exactly what I was going to bring up, is like, let's think about it from a different angle. What's the alternative?
Yeah.
What's the alternative strategy? Let's say you're a manufacturer or a distributor or some sort of B2B organization. You pretty much are either making the product or, distributing it to businesses, right? One of those two in some capacity, right? Like, what's your non-e-commerce / digital first alternative, right? I mean, are you going to get better sales reps to go knock on people's doors that no one's working on? The office is practically half of what it was, right? Like, in-person direct sales doesn't work as well, right? That's going to be less effective.
Yeah.
Cold calling, I mean, that's tough, right? Like, you could try, but I don't think that's going to scale very well. Cold email, I guess, but then how do you get the emails? At that point, it's like, well, it's kind of digital first anyways. You might as well try and get the emails on your website, right? I mean, what are the alternatives, right? I mean,
well, that's a
great.
I'm so glad.
Like,
I'm so glad you said that, because no, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm just kind of repeating myself. Like, I'm honestly asking you, like, I mean, I think the only alternative is like Shelf-Aware, I think, was a good example of an alternative where you build this kind of automated in-person experience. There are some alternatives, but that's still kind of a digital enabled alternative. It's not the way it used to be. And, I think there's still value in, like, there are companies like TJ Maxx that have figured out this still very effective in-person model, because they have this kind of hard to get inventory. So they haven't had to be as digital first as most other companies in their industry, right? So there are these weird exceptions, right? But I think that's pretty rare, right? When you
I mean, what I would say, to this is that you're right. Think about what is the alternative. I mean, that's a great question to pose to, an individual or a team or a company. It's like, what are your alternatives? You can get nostalgic, and I'm reluctant to use that word, but I can have nostalgia for my retail days before there was an e-commerce, right? I can have nostalgia for it. I remember what it was like to have, like Black Friday, where I had the key at Macy's and people were pounding on the door. I remember that, right? I mean, that's exciting, but that's not the way the world works now, right? That's why the time is now is so important. I can think about like how things were done, and I could see how things are done, and I could look at how things can be done using all the technologies that are out there today. Well, I choose to look at what can be done, right? There's a lot of stuff that I might want to do if I were a big B2B manufacturer or distributor or what have you, based on the technologies that exist out in the world. And, I'd test things out. That's a great thing to, also to leave our I can't even say it, our listeners with, is to say that you have to have testing in mind at all times. Like, before there was, mobile, maybe people didn't think about mobile, but then there was mobile. So you had to have a budget to test it. Before there was social media, you didn't have a budget for it, but then it existed and you had to figure out how to test it. This is that moment for B2B. You've got to figure out, like, all right, what am I going to begin? What can I test that's on the cutting edge? And let's just keep going. If some of it's, doing VR and AR, whatever, just test it out. Go, go, go.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like all these things that started out, it's like no one had a social media budget. Well, some people did, but not many people had one 5-10 years ago. That was like,
No, they didn't.
But the ones that were early adopters and really got ahead of the game got huge ROI, right? And now if you're late to the game, you have to build up, the testing and the ads, and it's all very saturated. It's so much harder to get into the game now. So the late adopters, it's going to get so hard to compete. And I think the other guest that was on was talking about that with SEO, right? Like if you're behind the game, e-commerce and the product data drives most of SEO. It's going to be hard to catch up to the guys that have already done a good job of that, right? They have such a leg up with all these things. I think that's what people don't kind of realize about this stuff is it's like, you don't just turn it on and it just magically works, right? Like there's kind of this legacy, there's basically these algorithms, right? SEO is an algorithm, Facebook is advertising is an algorithm, Google ads are an algorithm, and those algorithms have value. Like Google ads is a good example where like they give you a better deal if you get like a higher, what's it called?
Quality score.
Quality score, right?
Quality score.
So if you're starting from scratch, you have zero quality, right? Like you're starting from scratch, you have to build up those quality scores. The companies that have 10 years of data and have been doing this for 10 years and built these really strong quality scores they will spend less money and outrank the competitors. Like, think about that. How are you going to compete against that, if you're coming into this now and you are not taking it seriously? Or a lot of times underspending, right? They come in with these tiny little budgets. It's like you're coming to a gunfight with a knife, right? Or that's the saying, right? That's what these companies are doing, and then they blame, and then they go and think that something is wrong, right? They don't understand that, like what really happens. They don't realize that they came with a knife, and to a gunfight.
Well, I'll give you an example from my own life. I mean, one thing that's hilarious to me, I remember being in conversations with some companies about coupons, printed coupons. And I was like, you got to move out of the budget, move out of this budget. Printed coupons, like, come on, guys. Like, yeah, they still exist. And there's, there may be exceptions and you still can do it. But, it's not like everyone's getting that Sunday paper anymore and they're pawing through it and cutting out coupons. And this was like 5 years ago, like, not like 20 years ago. And now it's like, really, if you do a printed coupon, it's because it's the local restaurant or the dry cleaner, something really concrete that actually has some clear direction or whatever. It's the same with B2B today. You cannot rely on everything you did 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago. You have to always look at what people are up to today and look tomorrow and say, what can I try? What can I do? How do I compete? How do I exist? I want every business to succeed. I'm a very optimistic, positive force kind of guy. I want to see people succeed. But if they're doing things that are like hurting their business, I'm not going to hide that either. I'm going to go in and say, you know what? This is not really what you should be thinking right now. And that's what I want to say to everyone listening to this is like, think about today, think about the tech available to you, and think about tomorrow and what might be available, and be ready for it. Be ready to have these conversations and say, what can we do? Not like, how do we protect this, this old thing over here in the corner.
That's the other thing. I think a lot of these companies are so stuck in this scared kind of defense. Gary Vaynerchuk is a good, he loves to talk about defense, he says defense, offense. And I agree with him.
Yeah,
a lot of companies are so focused on defense and not showing their pricing and hiding everything and living like that. If they give away too much information out there on the internet, somehow their competitors will just destroy them. But like by doing that, they're stuck in this like defense and they're not moving forward in a smart way and playing offense. And they're playing so much defense, I guess, if you will, that they basically eventually will have zero offense. And if you don't score, you lose, right? Like you're gonna eventually, have nothing out there to have a value, right? To just only protecting a little bit that you have,
Yeah, I mean, I was, it doesn't sound relevant, but I'll make it sound relevant in a second. I was a religious studies major in college, of all things, right? So I started a business while I was in college, but that's what I found interesting. And so I liked history and all this kind of stuff. And there's this old like metaphor, this old thing based on a historical thing where it's like, you can defend yourself, to a degree, and that's great. But, you can't have that fortress so tight or those walls so high that nothing can get in or out, right? And that's really the image that I have in my mind about this now. You can't build up these walls that don't allow new things to enter, right? The new ideas always have to come into the business, and not everything is for you. I mean, I can't imagine that every business has to do TikTok or Clubhouse or, pick anything, right? They don't all have to do it. However, you better be aware and you better have a way to figure these things out. And you better, respect the digital world, because we're not going back to, the horse and buggy for most businesses. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So yeah, let's I think we got to wrap up because we're kind of out of time here. But I think what I want to leave people with is like, where are you going to spend your money? Because I think it's clear digital first initiatives are increasingly more effective. Social media, e-commerce, all these digital channels is where people's attention are going. And the old ways of doing things are increasingly less effective. Cold calling, cold outreach, direct, response, going and showing up in person. I mean, if you came to our office in person on a Friday, there might be no one there. Like you wouldn't be able to be able to get to anyone, right? So it's to me, it's like all that investment going into those decreasing value is losing opportunity of where you could be taking that money and putting it into the increasing digital, first areas of investment, right? And that's where I think companies are missing the mark, right? Because those things sort of worked and they kind of keep their money there. Even the yellow pages. Spending money.
I mean, have an innovation mindset, have an innovation culture, and really budget accordingly. And you're going to do better than people who don't have those things. Think about what you can do, how you need to think about these things as a team and as a company, and then do it. Just get out there and do it. And if you need advice, contact Trellis, and contact us. We're happy to talk about these things because this is our life, right? Like we're, you and me are immersed in this world, and we're trying to help people out. We're trying to make the case for the present and the future, right? And I really just want to see people succeed.
Yeah, and bring in help, like you said. Call Tim, and he'll help you as a part-time, digital exec, right? Yep. Like if you're like, man, we don't have much. I think that's also what it is. Be honest with yourself. Like we don't have a lot of companies. I think are not very honest with themselves. Like, oh, we're okay, or we've got digital talent. It's like if you really objectively compare to other organizations, they don't have the talent. Go talk to people. Bring someone in. There's a lot of people out there like you that'll come in part-time and help companies out at an executive level. Right?
I am ready, and if I can't, and I make this, I will make this offer to everybody listening. If I can't do it, I'll find somebody who can. Right? I really want people to listen to this and to succeed. You know, this is here to help you. Right? The hard truth about B2B e-commerce is meant to be exactly that. We're telling you things that you need to hear from us and from our experience and from all the experts we bring on. We want you to succeed. So, you know, reach out to me, reach out to Isaiah, Trellis. We're ready. Just give us a buzz, and we're happy to help you out.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.